If your project updates sound defensive, it's usually not because the project has problems. It's usually because the update is doing too much. A lot of project managers give updates like they're trying to manage stakeholder reactions before those reactions even happen. So they over explain, they soften bad news, they add too much context. And by the time they reach the point, the update already sounds less confident. A better update is much simpler. You want 3 parts: status, reason, next step. That is the structure. Say what is true, why that is true, and what happens next. If you do that well, your update will sound more controlled immediately. So, let's make this practical. The first part is status. This, of course, is where you say what is true right now. Not the whole backstory, not every pressure point, just the actual project status. A useful question to ask yourself here is, what does this audience need to understand first? Another good question is, if I had to say the update in one sentence, what would I say? That helps because a lot of project managers start too wide. They begin with the context before stakeholders even know what changed. That is where updates start feeling long and unfocused. So, in this first part, your job is to name the headline clearly. Is the project on track? Is the timeline moving? Is a dependency creating risk? Is scope changing? What is the actual status? That comes first. If the timeline moved, say that. If the issue is approvals, say that. If the issue is workflow alignment, say that. Lead with the main point. That alone makes the update sound stronger. The second part is reason. This is where you explain why the status is what it is. And this part matters because the update should not sound abrupt or incomplete. But it also should not turn into a long defense either. So the question to ask yourself here is, what is the main cause of this status? Not every cause, not every historical detail, but the main cause. You can also ask, what does this audience need to know to understand the update without getting lost in detail? That is the right level. Because one of the biggest mistakes project managers make is confusing explanation with control. They think if they explain everything, the update will sound stronger. Usually, it doesn't. In fact, usually it starts sounding defensive. So, in this section, name the real cause clearly. If the problem is capacity, say capacity. If the problem is approvals, say approvals. If the problem is external dependency timing, say that. Clear nouns make stronger updates. Vague language makes weaker ones. The third part is your next steps. This is where you show that the work is still being managed. And this is also important because an update without a next step can sound passive. A good question to ask yourself here is, what is happening now in response to the status? Or what should the audience expect next? That keeps the update moving forward. It tells stakeholders that the update is not just an observation, it is connected to action. That does not mean you need a huge recovery plan in every update. It just means the audience should know what happens now. Are you resetting the milestone? Are you waiting on a decision? Confirming a revised date? Escalating a dependency or clarifying scope? The next step gives the update direction. So, when you put the 3 parts together, the update becomes much easier to build. Your status, what is true right now, your reason, why that is true, and your next step, what happens now. That is the structure. And it works because it keeps you from filling the update with pressure language. A lot of defensive updates happen because the speaker starts justifying too early. They explain why it's not their fault, or why the team worked hard, or why the pressure came from somewhere else. That weakens the message. A project update should not sound like self-protection. It should sound like project control. So, instead of giving a long setup, make the update easier to follow. The timeline has moved. 2 approvals are still pending. We are resetting the milestone and confirming the revised date this week. That works because it's clear. It tells the audience what happened, why it happened, and what happens next. That is what a strong update does. Another mistake is trying to answer every possible follow-up inside the first version of the update. That is usually where rambling starts. You do not need to pre-defend every concern. You need to give the update clearly. Then, answer the next question if it comes. That is a much better rhythm, and it is also what makes the update sound calmer. Now, this matters even more when the news is not good. You do not need to make bad news sound soft. You need to make it sound managed. For example, the project is behind. The primary issue is external dependency timing. We are adjusting the milestone and bringing back a revised plan tomorrow. That sounds much stronger than a long explanation filled with pressure language. So, if you want a practical way to build your next project update, ask yourself 3 questions. What is true right now? Why is it true? And what happens next? Then, check 4 things before you speak. Is the headline clear? Did I name the real issue directly? Does this sound like communication and not justification? And did I stop once the update was clear? That is the goal. Not a longer update, a clearer one. Because stakeholders do not need a defensive update. They need a useful update. And that usually sounds much simpler than people think.